Odds are, if you clicked on this video, then you want to watch someone talk about the Friday the 13th movies. Well, last week we released a whole thing breaking down the franchise and about what it means to us a little more holistically, and next week we're going to be doing the same thing about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. This week, we put together every time we talked about the Friday the 13th movies on this channel, plus a little more for funsies. Obviously, we watched all the movies on the franchise to prep for the video, What Does Friday the 13th Mean to You? It would be a shame if those notes just went to waste, right? 1980s Friday the 13th. Now, we all know what Friday the 13th is about. Cabin counselors getting got, not by a unit in a hockey mask, but by a mystery killer hiding in the bushes throughout the production. The movie is more beautiful than it has any right to be thanks to the crazy amount of nature photography we get as padding between the intentionally one-dimensional characters getting mutilated by the special effects of Tom Savini. Not that every actor isn't doing everything they have with the script provided. And as much as I appreciate an even lower budget Halloween derivative, this is a movie eclipsed by and improved upon in nearly every way throughout its sequels, except for maybe that mystery element. And those aren't even high art either, but at least they're fun. 1981's Friday the 13th, Part 2. Apparently Jason's name was Josh at one point. Do you think a Josh would have been able to carry Friday the 13th series as long as a Jason could have? Otherwise, this time around, its second verse, same as the first, a little bit louder, and the killer isn't an elderly woman this time around. It's still about cabin counselors getting got in the woods, but between very down-to-earth performances and a slightly more dynamic script, everything feels a lot more fresh and energetic than it did the first time around. Mark and Vicky especially stood out as having great chemistry as characters, while the final girl, Ginny, stands out as a fan favorite for a reason. Amy Steele makes the final girl ploy feel very, very real while being an immensely strong character throughout the movie. This has always stood out as a personal favorite for me in the pre-zombie Jason run of movies, and it continues to do so. Jason himself is both really active and imposing in a way I don't think he gets to be again until the 2009 reboot. Friday the 13th, Part 3 from 1982. I know just about everyone knows it debuts here, but but for finally getting us the hockey mask. Otherwise, Third First does try to differentiate itself a little bit by not focusing on camp counselors, but some group of friends living in one of the many cabins of Crystal Lake. We also get a lot more Jason on screen since it is even less of a mystery than its predecessor. Even more so than the previous two Friday movies, the performances throughout here feel a little more campy and equally more charming, while Jason loses a lot of the speed of his that I liked in Part 2, in order to become more of the lumbering Frankenstein monster resembling unit of a killer. But Jason is also far more inventive in how he decides to get his teenagers this time around. Personal favorite of mine's being Rick's, mostly because of how much of a tool the character is throughout. It's a lot more of what we got before with a footprint of 80s 3D and all of that attempted potential. Friday the 13th, the final chapter from 1964. We've had cabin counselors, we've had friends at a cabin, how about friends at a cabin again? Throughout Tuesday the 17th, we follow both that aforementioned group of friends as well as the family that lives in the house next door to everyone else, with Jason waking up with an axe in his face just to continue his long-past Friday the 13th murder spree. The final chapter is by far the most professional production to date. It looks, sounds, and feels more polished. Everyone involved puts their 4 years of practice in the film industry to work and delivered everything that came before, but with a nice shiny coat of blood-colored paint. While I know many people prefer this to prior installments, it has never been my personal favorite. Not even close. I find there is a charm to those original 3 movies and Part 5, but yeah, that's next, and oh yeah, spoiler, this is not the final chapter. That is a little lost for me, most notably in the performances feeling less amateur and less natural and a little more Hollywood, but that is definitely a personal nitpick for me, and I don't even know if that makes sense as a nitpick. 1985's Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Do you think the franchise would have truly followed Tommy Jarvis if Corey Feldman had starred in the movie like he was supposed to? Also, does anybody have a good source on that, piece of trivia because I couldn't find one easily. Unsure if this movie would have changed much, as his character is just recast and only aged up a few years, or if Tommy Jarvis would have taken Reggie's role maybe. Either way, as it stands, New Beginning is that Friday the 13th where a bunch of mental health patients get murdered by the least satisfying bait and switch we could have gotten. Outside of the big killer reveal, I do appreciate the overall low-budget vibe the movie gives off, as well as the creativity in the setup and the actors and all of the decisions they ended up making individually. Not Jason's kills are also some of the most creative in the series, looking at Tina and Eddie both individually and as a combo. In contrast, I don't love how exploitative it feels the movie was behind the scenes, and I know this isn't the first time we've had that, equally glaring at Part 3. But it feels especially abusive in the behind the scenes of Part 5. And I've also never been a big fan of killing off a bunch of mental health patients in any setting or story. History has already been dark enough to people with impairments like that. 1986's Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. You know, I don't think the question's ever been answered, but would cremating Jason Voorhees actually put him down, for good? Or for at least a movie? We are back to cabin counselors at legally distinct Camp Crystal Lake. Jason did actually die for realsies 2 movies ago, but we still need movies, so cue up Tommy Jarvis and Lightning so we can have zombie Jason rising to do his thing. Lots and lots of murder of camp counselors. In contrast to Part 5, Part 6 puts back on all the polish from Part 4 to give us possibly the most professional and Hollywood-looking Friday the 13th movie production up until 2003's Freddy Vs. Jason. In contrast to every movie that came before, Jason Lives is also a partial comedy, leaning into all the tropes that the series would become known for before series like Scream in a more tongue-in-cheek way. In secrets, this was my first Friday the 13th movie, and I will forever have a soft spot in my heart for it, but at the time it was also a very perfect introduction to the series for me, since it pokes fun at just about everything you would expect in a Friday the 13th movie. The more slapstick tone doesn't mean we don't get fun kills, it's just the kills end up being a little more like punchlines than inventive this time around. 1988's Friday the 13th Part 7, A New Blood. Took us 7 movies to get to the actor who'd become the fan favorite in the lead role of the hockey masked slasher. Yay for Kane Hodder. 7 movies in, we are doing another group of friends at the cabins for a weekend story. This time with a legally distinct Carrie and our lead girl Tina hanging out next door with her mother and an ass-faced doctor. We also get the little bonus treat of having Tina get visions of Jason's kills as they happen, my favorite addition to the formula in this entire movie, along with an extremely satisfying finale. I cannot highlight that finale enough. Despite the twists to the formula, and most likely because of the neutering of the movie's special effects by the MPAA, this ends up feeling like the most generic Friday the 13th of the franchise, at least thus far. We haven't gotten to Jason Takes Manhattan yet. Not that this hasn't steadily grown on me over the years, thanks to the special effects that did survive in Kane Hodder's iconic silent performance. Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan from 1989. What do you think made the punk so special? To be the only people to, distract Jason to the point of making him stop, but only provoke him enough to scare everyone away instead of, anything else. We have up and made the biggest change to the Friday the 13th formula in Part 8. It's still about our big boy Jason walking through just about everyone in his way, but this time he's on a boat. And, sometimes he's in New York, I guess. I do not think there is a person on the internet who has talked about this movie and not remarked about how bad it is for a lot of people, so we will spare you that and talk about what we do like about this movie. Primary standout being Kane Hodder's Jason being able to carry over that intimidation and menace into the world of New York, where it would be really easy for the character to feel so small. And I know it wasn't the planned version of the kill, but the sauna rock murder has always kind of stood out in my mind. Even if I don't think the effect looked the best, it's one of the ones that I always think of when talking about Part 8. The production also does make its very best use of the limited time they had on the filming location. A lot of the sequences that take place in the actual city are fun and engaging, with great reactions from the extras just minding their day in this version of New York. Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday from 1993. So is anyone else interested in the story of whoever finally convinced law enforcement they needed to absolutely obliterate Jason Voorhees? Or was that just me? As far as this story goes, it's new studio, new rules. Not that we cared too much about continuity in the past, but it might as well not exist going forward, FYI. And, that's okay. It lets us do weird things, like make the spirit of Jason take the form of a demon worm who possesses whoever eats his heart. Or give him a sister and a niece and an ancient family curse linked to the Necronom in the Evil Dead movie. Sure, why not? As a Friday the 13th movie, the only thing really recognizable are the kills that finally deliver on the visceral gore that you thought the series had in the previous 8 movies before you saw them, especially within the unrated version of this movie. If you are the kind of person who likes to try and remove the story from a source material and view it as its own sort of thing, it's still a very weird movie about snowballing a demon worm to do body swap killings, 2001's Jason X. Okay, so according to Jason X, we have until the end of this year to enjoy the NHL. Who do you think's going to win the final Stanley Cup?
What's a hockey mask? Facial armor. Used in a sport outlawed in 2024.
In the not-too-distant future.
We've given up on trying to kill Jason, so we opt to freeze the zombie instead. But after the United States prison system or whoever is holding Jason has a minor fuck-up, a scientist gets frozen with our series lead. Cut to a few hundred years in the future, and it looks like everyone is equally inept at dealing with an unstoppable killing machine on a spaceship as they are in the woods. Jason X manages to feel low-budget in a completely different capacity than its brother and sister features. We aren't utilizing our lack of funds to build up atmosphere and think of creative camera tricks. This time around, we're just going to do it all in post. Great. This installment also takes a drastic shift in tone that we haven't seen since Part 6 and Jason was newly zombified. A tone that I have always appreciated, but mixed with the different kind of low-budget vibe, I understand why this is more of a divisive Jason movie. Freddy Vs. Jason from 2003. Took us 15 years of production hell to get to the cathartic bliss that is Freddy vs. Jason. Watching Freddy scheme from the afterlife and somehow send Jason to Elm Street to remind the Midwest what nightmares are truly about. Terrorizing stereotypes until Freddy has enough power to deliver on the title twice over. As a Jason movie, the character really shines. We rarely get sequences of the character marching through large groups getting a true massacre. The movie still has always felt like a Freddy Krueger movie to me in which Jason is the real hero. We just follow the final girl instead. Kurtzinger also brings a unique presence to Jason that is a little more sad than the previous incarnations that has always worked for me. Jason being afraid of water, though, has always been dumb in context of the larger franchise. I appreciate everything this movie does right. It could have easily gone very meta, as was the trend at the time, but instead of leaning more Bride of Chucky, director Ronnie Yu opted to make this feel more like a classic slasher with all the shine of the early 2000s. The writing of the story doesn't always make sense, but the movie is largely fun, creative, and fast-paced. Friday the 13th from 2009. It took 12 movies for the franchise to get a proper reboot in 2009, where instead of a straightforward remake, here the filmmakers would opt to combine the first 4 movies to craft something they hope would equal to something greater than the sum of its parts. You get the prologue, heavily taking from the original, Baghead Jason comes from Part 2, and Friends at a Cabin setting gives me heavy flashbacks from Part 3 in the final chapter, plus the dude looking around for his lost sister subplot from the final chapter, all with the shiniest coat of polish that Anchor Bay could find. This is the only Friday the 13th movie that I've been able to see in theaters, and I was the prime demographic when I was 16 and it was released in 2009. It is an excellent distillation of the story and the general catharsis of the franchise as a whole. One of my favorites, but it definitely lost the low-budget vibe that is so ingrained in the franchise that helped enhance the mood and made the script quality a lot more forgivable. 2017's Never Hike Alone, a Friday the 13th fan film. In this fan film, we follow a hiker and a blogger that stumbles into Camp Crystal Lake and into the arms of everyone's favorite hockey mask killer, let chase ensue. That's it. Stretched over the course of less than an hour, the creators wanted to make a bare bones and thrilling zombie Jason story, and they succeeded. If you plucked this off of YouTube and inserted it into any Friday the 13th movie, the only thing that would stand out is how much better looking this is over whichever movie you put it in. All of Vincent DeSantis' films that I have seen have been just as well made, if not more technically polished than the major releases he is emulating. I cannot recommend Never Hike Alone enough to both Friday the 13th fans and fans of classic slashers in general. 2020's Never Hike in the Snow. An amazing follow-up to Never Hike Alone that does very, very simple things to make sense within the franchise and stand out. Taking place during the winter, and bringing back Tommy Jarvis in a significant fashion. We bring back a few more familiar faces and a stream of continuity never seen in the Friday the 13th franchise proper. The kills are equally simple, memorable, and effective thanks to the snowy backdrop, but the sound design anchors the whole production and gives the thing a vaguely unsettling vibe. Expanding Tom Matthews' role also works brilliantly. He falls back into the role perfectly and is brought in a way that you don't have to be explicitly familiar with parts 4, 5, or 6, but, definitely should be. Never Hike Alone 2 from 2023. So if you cut the 3 Never Hike Alone fan films into a feature-length movie, it would probably be my favorite Friday the 13th of them all. We start out by telling a lead-up story to Never Hike Alone, but things eventually lead to a continuation of the events we saw there. Jason chasing Jarvis in an ambulance to the hospital to wreak havoc before everyone doubles back to Crystal Lake for relevance. Where the first 2 productions were the equivalent to 2 or 3 amazingly produced stalking and chasing scenes, here the scope is expanded in a way that brings everything together instead of furthering isolated at smaller sister films. It provides a very satisfying conclusion to Tommy Jarvis' story while letting the character have fun and bounce off the rest of the well-performed cast. His name was Jason, 30 years of Friday the 13th. A fun and short documentary that chooses to look at the franchise as a whole, breaking its time up thematically instead of going into detail movie by movie, as is the trend with lengthier documentaries. Everything is hosted and narrated by practical effects legend Tom Savini, walking through some great little showcases of gore and horror. This documentary does an amazing job of capturing what the franchise means to its creators and fans as a whole, celebrating something that blatantly started out as a way to capitalize off trends that grew into something significantly more than anyone thought it would for sure. Crystal Lake Memories, the complete history of Friday the 13th from 2013. Now I know you all wanted a nearly 7-hour Friday the 13th documentary. Well, here it is. Hosted and narrated by the original Tommy Jarvis, Corey Feldman, next to a campfire with interviews from every person involved in the series that responded to the creators' emails, I'm sure. It's clear that the makers of this documentary love the franchise and want to honor Jason Voorhees and the legacy of the feature films that so many people are fans of. This is definitely a piece meant to be experienced in portions. I watched every chapter of the documentary as I watched the movies as supplemental material. I'm pretty sure that's how it was originally released at some point, making for a seamless and engaging way to enjoy this documentary in bite-sized chunks. DeadMeat's Friday the 13th playlist. Since coming onto the scene about 7 years ago, DeadMeat has exploded as horror royalty. The YouTube series covers a new horror movie just about every week. The series started as a platform to make jokes and look at your favorite horror movie kills, debuting by covering every movie in the Friday the 13th franchise. Within a year or two, the team putting it together expanded the scope of the series to be more of a celebration of horror while also telling jokes and counting kills. It might not sound like a big shakeup, but the changes really felt, so much so that host James A. Janice and company opt to remake every video about Friday the 13th from the ground up. It was through the Friday the 13th kill count recount that I found DeadMeat. Every video the company has put together is well crafted and edited, and James is one of the most energetic and enthusiastic horror hosts out there. It has become a tradition to check DeadMeat after watching virtually every horror movie in this house. I cannot give the people at DeadMeat enough praise. They are genuinely good people. MattDraper's Friday the 13th videos. MattDraper has been making solid video essays and content for about 7 years, but I think he really hit his stride just 3 years ago when he started making these larger retrospective videos covering entire franchises. He doesn't exclusively cover horror, but it's the genre he probably covers the most at this point. In relation to Friday the 13th, he has put out 2 amazing videos. One is an overall retrospective on the franchise, where he briefly goes over the series' history of each installment individually, and a video where he goes into the production of the unmade Friday the 13th sequels. I find Matt to be very well read. I appreciate his grasp of these franchises and what they come to represent, as well as his overall video editing style. His videos feel good. Again, thank you for sitting with us through our marathon of Friday the 13th. We love Jason and his beautiful shoulders. I feel like I keep saying that this is a series that succeeded in spite of itself every step of the way, and that largely still stands. Very rarely is a Friday the 13th movie trying to wow or surprise the audience or outside of a jump scare. But there is a beautiful charm to the trashiness of the franchise. That's all we have for this week, though. Go out there and be the camp counselor Jason would have wanted, please.